You are listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. Sustainable World Radio brings you in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about positive solutions to environmental challenges. Solutions that adhere to the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, fair share. Are you interested in learning more about permaculture projects around the globe? How to plant a food forest? Restorative design or ethnobotany? Then stay tuned for Sustainable World Radio. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier. My guest today is John Stock, Outreach Coordinator and Plant Sanctuary Manager for United Plant Savers, or UPS. John has been educating about environmental issues and conservation for over 20 years. John manages the Forest Grown Verification Program and the Botanical Sanctuary Network for UPS. When he's not working at United Plant Savers, John grows food and forest farms woodland medicinal plants on 100 acres a few ridges over from United Plant Savers Botanical Sanctuary. Welcome to Sustainable World Radio, John.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
And today we'll be talking all about United Plant Savers, which is a nonprofit dedicated to protecting native medicinal plants of the U.S. and Canada, and also their native habitat. And I think UPS has been called the consciousness of the herbal community. And for listeners who aren't familiar with UPS and your work, can you tell us a bit about the organization? And I think you just celebrated 26 years of action and advocacy for these plants.
Well, we're into our 26th year now. In September was our 25th anniversary celebration, so we're fresh off of that. Yeah, like you said, we're considered the consciousness of the herbal products industry, I guess you could say, in some sense. That's how this all got started, by Rosemary Gladstar and others about 25 years ago, who were involved in and had their own company, herbal products companies, and they were making herbal products and utilizing a lot of these plants that we advocate for today. And they felt compelled to, after learning themselves that some of these plants may be at risk in their native habitat, they felt compelled to do something about it and created United Plant Savers to advocate for at-risk native medicinal plants.
And we're going to learn about why we should be advocating for these plants. UPS, I think it's the Botanical Sanctuary, I believe, is made up of like over 350 acres. Can you describe it to our listeners? And do you work on site there?
Yeah, I'm right here looking out the window.
You are so lucky.
It's snowing here today in southeast Ohio for almost the first time this year. We've got about 3 inches of snow, so it's one of those days where every branch has a layer of snow on top of it, and every bramble and leaf has the same thing. So it's this great monotone landscape right now, and really bright. And so it's really nice here. Yeah, we're 379 acres. We're in Rutland, Ohio, which is in southeast Ohio. We're about 8 miles from the Ohio River, which puts us in a kind of a unique spot in terms of the biodiversity here. We've got we're kind of right on the line of a couple growing zones, and then we're down here in the Ohio River Valley. So a lot of plants overlap here from different zones, and there's an incredible amount of biodiversity here, which is true for most of Appalachia. We're considered the foothills of the Appalachia Mountains, and the biodiversity here is pretty incredible. You know, depending on who you talk to, most people place the biodiversity in terms of plants and animals in the top 10 in the world. So we're really lucky to be here.
And it's supposedly, from what I gathered online, and it looks absolutely stunning. And I think you have a wide variety of trees, fungi, and plants growing there.
Indeed, we do. Yeah, I think nearly 400 species of plants, and at least on the formal surveys that have been done here, and people find new ones all the time. So it's really exciting and interesting to be able to come here to work every day.
I bet. And I would love my office to be there.
Yeah, and we're especially lucky. Our office this time last year, we were in a office in our barn that used to be a horse stall that was converted to an office, and this year I'm sitting in just a gorgeous new Center for the Conservation of Medicinal Plants that we built here on the sanctuary over the past couple of years, and finally moved into it at the last summer. So for folks who haven't got to Southeast Ohio to check us out, there's lots to see here now.
Sounds amazing. And I think that is like the only or one of the only centers that actually showcases and highlights Appalachian herbs.
Yeah, for sure. We're really the only organization that is specifically dedicated to the conservation of at-risk native medicinal plants. Many of these plants grow in Appalachia, although we advocate for plants all over the United States and Canada. For instance, peyote in South Texas is on our at-risk list, and sandalwood in Hawaii is on our at-risk list, and OSHA in Colorado. And so it's not just Appalachia, but that's where we happen to be based.
And so, John, why do native medicinal plants need our attention and action now?
Well, one reason is that I'm not sure what the number looks like from 2018, but in 2017, the herbal products industry in the U.S. was $8 billion industry, and any of these at-risk plants that are most of these at-risk plants that we advocate for. And when I say that, there are 20 plants on our at-risk list, and those include the ones I already spoke of, but also in addition to that, there's ginseng, golden seal, black and blue cohosh. The list goes on to 20. Of those plants that are used for herbal medicine that go into the trade, most of those are being harvested from the wild, and so there's a growing need and a limited supply of wild populations of these plants. In addition, all of these plants that are at risk are one reason they're at risk is because they require specific habitat to grow in. For instance, many of these Appalachian plants need intact, mature forest. They don't grow everywhere in the intact forest, even here in their native range. There are specific areas. For instance, ginseng, golden seal. A lot of these plants, like the north-facing hillsides, where it doesn't get as hot and dry as the other aspects of the hills do, and they like hollers down there where it's the well-drained soil but super rich and cool, and so that habitat, for lots of reasons, is disappearing at a pretty alarming rate. When you consider things like mountaintop removal, coal mining, pipelines, driveways, roads, anytime someone builds a house down here, for the most part, they're clearing forests. So all these things add up and contribute to habitat loss.
Yeah, I could see how that would be a big problem. And then also you mentioned overharvesting, because when I was looking at your at-risk list, I had to say reading it felt like I was perusing the aisles of Whole Foods or another retailer because sadly, right? Because so many of the plants on the list you see in also a lot of products that you would never imagine herbs being in. So I can see how that popularity of herbal medicine, while it's a really great thing on the one hand, is also leading to overharvesting. And then when you add that into the habitat loss, I can see how it's a double whammy for these plants.
Yeah, for sure. And, when it was, years ago, when it was just people in our region, or any bioregion for that matter, using the plants that grow in their bioregion for medicine, there's a fairly good balance there. If the only people who are using Appalachian medicinals for their medicine lived in Appalachia, then I wouldn't have a job, and I'd be happy for that.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is, these plants are being harvested in Appalachia and utilized all over the world, and that is really putting a lot of pressure on these wild populations.
So really, just because golden seal and echinacea, which they're in so many formulas, and like you said, people use them worldwide, I think it's really important for us at this time to find out what local plants, abundant local plants are growing that have the same actions as these popular herbs, and then really try and grow those ourselves, I would think.
That's spot on, or at least, utilize the plants in your bioregion. I'm not an herbalist, but for many of these plants, and for most, there are analogs that can be used in replace of them, in place of them, or golden seals. One, at least I know a few of them, like Oregon grape has berberine, and which is an active constituent in golden seal, as well as barberry. And around here, barberry, we do have a native barberry, but most of the barberry we see in our woods is an invasive. So, you could do good two different ways with by harvesting barberry and utilizing that for your berberine instead of golden seal.
Let's talk a bit about the list really quickly. Is how do you determine whether a plant is being over-harvested and I guess or endangered or at risk? I guess you just don't see it as much as you did, but how do you determine and who determines what plants go on the list?
Yeah, it's a fairly involved process. There are many more than the 20 plants that we advocate for that, if analyzed through our at-risk tool, would most likely score at a level that they would be considered at risk as well. Mm-hmm. So the process is either someone within our organization or outside the organization has a plant that they feel is threatened, and we as a organization, our board of directors and our director, Susan Leopold, determine which of these plants they want to prioritize and score through the system. And then that plant, for instance, we have one that is not on our at-risk list yet, but is being considered, which is ramps, Allium trichocum, which is our native leek, and it's at risk here in Appalachia. To score the leek, we would assemble as many experts on that plant as we can find, and which you can imagine is a difficult thing when you start talking about specific plants like that. Folks that know about how that plant is harvested, which part of the plant is harvested, how often it can be harvested, the abundance and the range of the plant is considered, the habitat of that plant is considered, the volume of the plant that is in demand currently is considered, and whether or not the plant can be cultivated or if there are alternatives to that plant like we talked about earlier. These are all things that we ask these experts to evaluate the plant on, and they're assigned a score. And then the score kind of gives us an idea relative to other plants that have been run through the tool, how at risk this plant may be. And that's kind of the thumbnail process.
And are there any laws or regulations that protect medicinal plants?
Well, there are a few. There's only really two technically plants that are considered endangered as defined by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And ginseng is one, and it's regulated by the federal government, by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that the responsibility to regulate that plant is put on the states where ginseng grows. So each state has either the Department of Wildlife or most likely it's like the Department of Natural Resources is in charge of regulating ginseng and its harvest in those particular states. But that's really the only plant on our at-risk list. Golden seal is listed at a different level, and so it's not regulated, but technically it's listed by the IUCN.
And did you say there was another plant that was regulated or no?
Ginseng and golden seal.
Okay, and golden seal. Okay. And golden seal has an interesting story, actually, right? Because what I gathered from your website was that as far back as I think 1912, people were advocating for, not over consuming golden seal.
In terms of harvest?
Yes.
Yes. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, not consuming it internally.
Yeah. Right.
You have to watch that too, but he was talking about something something else. Yes, so I think we've known about this, but then on the other hand, we also have people who say, well, it's just a plant, and why should we care? And so what do you say to people that say that?
Well, I think a lot about the fact that by advocating for these plants, we're doing more. We're advocating for, like I said, like the habitat, the intact, mature forest, which lots of things, including humans, need. Lots of things, and humans need beyond the golden seal plant. So by advocating for this plant, which is also necessary, we're advocating for bigger picture things in terms of the environment and our ability to survive here on the earth like we have in the past. And I guess the other thing that I would say is relates to kind of the same thing, but biodiversity. We're trying to preserve biodiversity by preserving these plants. One of these plants in particular, like golden seal, ginseng. That's kind of a keystone plant of the forest. When you have a forest that will support ginseng, that says a lot about the health of the habitat. Not every forest will support ginseng, even with the right growing conditions, due to the fact that it's, maybe the biodiversity is low, the plant community, ginseng's other friends there's not enough diversity there to support them. And so these are, ginseng's definitely the keystone plant, and a lot of these other plants are part of that plant community, and that biodiversity is precious. We're losing it at an alarming rate in the world, and that's why I mentioned about Appalachia being so biodiverse. Traditionally Appalachia has been viewed as a place where we can come and take things like timber at first, and then coal. Now it's coal and oil and gas, and it's really been it's been underappreciated for its biodiversity. And one of the things we think about is the future of our region in terms of Appalachia, and we believe the future of Appalachia in terms of its economic benefit to the world is not in extractive industry, but it's in its biodiversity. And by protecting these plant communities, people come here already for our biodiversity, just like people go to the Amazon or people go to Costa Rica. We have people. We had nearly 2,000 people come here last year because of these plants. So we feel like this is the next, economic driver of our region. And we're ready to shift away from this extractive attitude and have people appreciate the biodiversity that's here.
And like you said, there's plants that have yet to be discovered as well. And who knows what's there? If we're looking at it from a purely human-centric, we also have to think of, like you said, if they're keystone species, other species depend on these plants as well.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about how United Plant Savers works with gardeners, herbalists, and farmers to save and grow these endangered and at-risk species. If you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, one of our strongest and most impactful programs that we have is the Botanical Sanctuary Network. When United Plant Savers was started 25 years ago, it was just an idea in an office, and then a few years later we acquired this land here in Rutland and created the United Plant Savers Botanical Sanctuary. And since then, over the past 20 years, we've created this network of botanical sanctuaries across the United States and Canada. Right now, I haven't counted since the first of the year, but I think we're up to about 140 botanical sanctuaries. And these are pieces of land that we do not own. Mm-hmm. They're individually owned, but people have enrolled them in this program. And to be able to participate in the program, we ask that you as a landowner have either representative populations of some of these plants that we consider at risk, or that you have suitable habitat and you're reintroducing these plants to your landscape. And the main idea behind this is that, these are now all living seed banks of this, biodiversity that we keep talking about. And so when conditions allow, these living seed banks will be able to spread those plants back across the landscape where they should be. We've kind of demonstrated that on a smaller scale here at the sanctuary in our whole region in the 40s through the 70s. This land in southeast Ohio was mined for coal.
Oh, wow.
The sanctuary, much of it was actually mined. They used a technique called contour mining, where they just go up to the very top seam of coal at the top of the ridge, and they go around the ridge and they carve off the overburden and push it over into the valley, and then harvest the 2 or 3, 4 foot seam of coal that's up there and haul it off the hill. And so that happened here in 1959 on the sanctuary. And after that was done, people described the landscape as a moonscape. That was a common way to describe it. All the trees were gone. The topsoil was gone. It was just kind of these ridges of rubble that were left behind. And it's devastating to our community in terms of what it did to our water, natural water table and flows, and the silt that was created from that. But what we've seen since then, what is it now? It's 60, 70 years, is that, let me back up just a second. So they were just working on the ridges, right? So some of these hollers that are rich in plant life, they weren't really disturbed. And on the sanctuary, we had a good example of that. The south-facing hillside, high up on the ridge, was mined and moonscaped. But then just across the valley, down by the creek, on the north-facing hillside, this biodiversity maintained itself. And so the past 70 years, over that time, we have seen those plants migrate out of that pocket, that preserved pocket, into areas that had been disturbed years before. And so we know that process works. We witness it here anecdotally, and that's what we hope for with our Botanical Sanctuary Network.
So basically, these botanical sanctuaries that you have scattered across the U.S. and Canada are almost like plant banks, like a seed bank.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, that's exciting. That is very hopeful.
Yeah, and it's really great to see all the people who are participating in their enthusiasm for plants and for conservation, and it's just a really powerful program.
And I would imagine that these plant sanctuaries would actually have a beneficial effect on communities where they're located as well.
That's interesting you'd mention that, because that's another thing that happens. That's another side effect that I've seen. I haven't been to all these sanctuaries, not even close, but I've been to a few, and that's exactly what happens there. You set a piece of land and you set some intentions, and one of the things we ask the sanctuaries to do is have some type of educational outreach, whether that's some classes on plant ID in the summer, or a monthly herb walk, or it shows itself in all different ways in terms of the educational outreach, but they all have that component. And yeah, I can't speak for them all, but I can speak for the few that I've been to, including our own. The United Plant Savers Botanical Sanctuary, for example, like I mentioned, is 379 acres. And over the past, it's been longer, even before United Plant Savers was here, this land was rich in forest botanicals and well known for that, and our whole region is. And about 50 years ago, my neighbor Paul Strauss moved down here. He was just a young hippie kid, fresh back from the West Coast, and fell in love with the plants that were here, and also fell in love with, that was just post strip mining, so land was dirt cheap. He bought his first 100 acres, I think, for something like $80 an acre. And so it was, land was cheap, and that's what attracted him. And then he began doing some reclamation and also just falling in love and learning all the plants where he lives. And So since that time, people have been kind of moving to this area to be with the same interests. And so over time, over the past 50 years, in addition to this 379-acre botanical sanctuary, there's now a community of people who are, it's not a commune, there's no formal organization, it's just people that have similar land management techniques. Like I wouldn't expect one of my neighbors to clear cut their forest or put in a gas well or sell their mineral rights or really put up a cell tower for that matter. We've been pretty reluctant to do that. But so now in addition to this 379 acres, we're actually protecting about 3,000 acres that are contiguous to the sanctuary with the community that came here because the sanctuary was here.
So pockets of hope across the U.S. and Canada. I love it.
Indeed, yeah.
So if someone is listening and they have land, what is the criteria for becoming involved with UPS and having a plant sanctuary on your property?
Yeah, there's an application on our website, www.unitedplantsavers.org, and it's fairly straightforward, and where we ask you to describe your property, the plants that are growing there. We ask you to describe what kind of educational outreach you're doing. We love to see pictures and stories and whatever else you want to attach and send in, and and then we evaluate it and hopefully invite you into the Botanical Sanctuary Network.
That sounds like an empowering way to deal with some of the changes that we're witnessing on the planet right now with climate change and some of the environmental policies that we're having to deal with here in the U.S. at least. I think this would be a very empowering way to feel like you're making a difference.
I think so, and I think, it definitely is. That it does serve that.
Mm-hmm. And becoming a member, too, of United Plant Savers is pretty easy, right? I think you have quite a few members. Is it over 3,000, I think?
It is over 3,000. We've got about 4,000 members who support us with their yearly membership of $35. We really, we don't have an endowment. We rely on our enthusiastic members to support us. Each year on January 1, we start with technically zero money in our bank account, and we spend the rest of the year, generating money, teaching our classes, having our workshops. We have an internship program. We manage a program called the Forest Grown Verification System, which is a way to differentiate. It's a third-party inspection system that is a way to differentiate plants that are grown intentionally and cultivated in the forest from wild plants in the forest. So we've been training forest farmers for the past 20 years, and now we have a way for those forest farmers to differentiate themselves from wild harvesters, and there's now a premium price being put on by consumers, right? The consumers are the folks, the listeners are the folks that are driving this because they no longer want to participate in a supply chain that is depleting wild populations of plants. So we have an alternative to that, and folks like Mountain Rose Herbs have a line of forest-grown verified plants now. I think they have forest-grown verified ginseng leaf, black cohosh, where you can, instead of buying from wild harvested sources of these plants, you can buy from farmers.
That would be great. And I think people really want to do the right thing and purchase products that are made with accountability. But I feel like it's hard to differentiate in the store between which products are, really made from over-harvested, wild-crafted herbs and those that aren't. How can we tell? It sounds like the forest-grown verification is one way. Do you have any other tips for people who like herbal medicine but want to do the right thing?
Ask questions. Know where the producers of your herbal product are getting their raw materials. Ask those questions. Make them answer. Mm-hmm. The reality is, like I said, in terms of these Appalachian forest botanicals, or these, even let's just say these at-risk native medicinals, in most cases they are coming from wild populations. So if a plant on our at-risk list is in your herbal product, there's a good chance it's coming from a wild population. And, I'm not saying that that's all bad. There are, traditionally, historically, we have been able to manage these plants. Lots of people down here in Appalachia have learned how to sustainably steward a patch of golden seal or ginseng or black cohosh or any of these plants, where the same family is going back to the same patch year after year and only taking the oldest. One strategy would be taking the oldest plants and leaving the young ones to grow, and replanting the berries and dividing the rhizomes when you harvest some root, and all kinds of techniques to help encourage the patch instead of deplete the patch. But other factors beyond that have pushed the harvest to unsustainable limits, and things like TV shows that show that digging ginseng, you can make thousands and thousands of dollars, which happened 6 or 8 years ago, and sent people into the woods who didn't have any of this ancestral knowledge over how to steward these patches and just indiscriminately dug, and that really put a big dent into ginseng in particular. So question where your herbs are coming from, and then use that information to make good consumer choices.
And I think, too, once companies get enough feedback on that they tend to change. That's a generalization, but I would hope that they would change their supply. But if there is no accountability, that I can see where it's a murky issue.
Well, the other interest from herb companies is that, we're trying to protect their supply chain. We want to see these plants used. We don't. UPS has never considered asking for a moratorium on any of these plants necessarily. We understand that, humans and these plants have had a connection for a long, long time, and we want that to continue. But we really need to do something differently if we want that to happen. So forest farming is a great way to do it, and it solves a couple problems at once. It provides cultivated plants for this industry and for the people who use those plants, and it also provides money for farmers in Appalachia. And parts of Appalachia are some of the most impoverished places in the United States. So it's a win-win.
It sounds like when you were talking about how people learn that they can go and, I guess it's almost like plant poaching, where they can go and dig up all this ginseng and make money. I think education is key. And so I believe that UPS also offers a medicinal plant conservation certificate where you can learn to be a plant steward, learn how to be a medicinal plant steward. So I think education is vital, right? And teaching people.
It is. And that's a big part of our outreach, whether we're having a workshop here to teach people how to grow these plants, or tabling at an event, a herb conference, or a festival, or someplace where we're just trying to raise awareness. It really is all about education, and one of the ways we do that is through the Medicinal Plant Conservation Certificate program, which I don't like to say a lot. I mostly refer to it as the United Plant Savers Internship Program.
That's easier.
Yeah, and it's an amazing program that we do twice a year for 6 weeks. It was started over 20 years ago by my neighbor Paul Strauss, who I referred to, and then after Paul, my other neighbor Chip Carroll, who still participates and runs the program when he can, although his young family is taking a lot of his time. He ran the program for 10 years, and now, I have the opportunity to help run that program, and it's just one of the most amazing things we do here. It's twice a year in the spring and the fall for 6 weeks. This spring we begin on April 13th, and I just notified 6 people last week that they'd been selected for the program, and we bring 6 people in, and they stay here with us for 6 weeks, and they learn all about how to identify these plants in our woods, at least the ones that grow in this bioregion. They learn about its life cycle. They learn how to propagate it. From that community that I mentioned earlier that has now occupies about 3,000 acres contiguous to the sanctuary, that in addition to land, that communities full of people who have intense knowledge about these plants or about herbal medicine or about conservation. So we have just a stable of teachers here in the neighborhood and also in our greater area that we take advantage of. And so about half the time the interns are here, they're working on the sanctuary, helping us maintain trails and helping us maintain our landscapes and our buildings here, and they'll do some plant propagation, invasive species control. That's a big part of their work here. That's about half the time that we program for them, and the other half, they're out in the community learning about herbal medicine, or they're taking a class on ginseng or ramps, or they're touring Paul Strauss's farm, or Lonnie Galt-Thies's apothecary that she owns, Equinox Botanicals. So they get deep into it, and we loosely, describe it as the ethnobotany of Southeast Ohio, because they learn all about the people and the plants that are here, and beyond. We go to one field trip we take every year is down into West Virginia, where they've suffered from mountaintop removal. There's been well over 500 mountaintops removed down there in West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, for coal. And we go down and we visit Keeper of the Mountains down just south of Charleston, West Virginia, and tour a mountaintop removal coal site, Caford Mountain, and witness firsthand the devastation of that practice and what it does to not only plant habitat but human habitat. And yeah, it's just an incredible time. And these people walk away, and go back to some go back to their normal lives, but generally we see people from here go on to more internships or herb school or some plant-related or conservation-related activity. And over the years, we've sent nearly 200 people off to be advocates for these plants after going through the internship program.
I want to come. It sounds amazing. Immersing myself in medicinal herbs, I would love it. And
it is fantastic. In the spring, it's so good. We get them. Well, the fall is beautiful too, but in the spring, they arrive. When they arrive, they're depending on the season, on the year, and how the weather's been. There may only be a handful of herbs up in the woods. Less than 10 certainly. So after they're here for a couple of days, they virtually know every herb that's been and many trees that are in the woods, because there's just a few up. By the time they leave, that number will have, multiplied several times over, and it's, when you come in September to our program and you walk into the woods and all it is green, it's a little overwhelming. There's no way you would ever learn all those plants. But in the spring, it's a little more controlled, and it's just it's amazing to have these people here and spend time with us. It's amazing to have them. It's wherever we live, we tend to take things for granted, and twice a year we get to be reminded, the folks who live here, what a very special place this is when the interns come and remind us of that.
It's wonderful. And so UPS works in the U.S. and Canada. Any thoughts of getting international growers involved in the botanical sanctuaries?
Well, we do have a separate program that UPS administers called the Sacred Seeds Network, and it's essentially the Botanical Sanctuary Network, but on an international level. And there's information on that on our website as well. Much less participation. We're a tiny little organization. We have 2 permanent employees, myself and our executive director, Susan Leopold, and then in addition we have 2 AmeriCorps service members that are stationed here, Bailey Grenard and Brenna Dobosh. And that's the staff. So, if you look on our website and you see all the programs that we're doing, I mentioned some of them today, and managing our 4,000 members and reminding them to renew their memberships and processing their memberships. We've got our hands full, with just the U.S. and Canada.
I'm sure with two full-time staff.
It would be great if our organization spawned more organizations across the globe that were doing the same thing. I know there's lots of folks out there doing conservation work. but we can always use more plant conservation groups, that's for sure.
Yes. And so we're getting close to the end of our time today, but I'm curious if there's any, like even one or two success stories with plants that you would want to share with listeners.
Well, in a strange way, I think maybe golden seal is a success story in this way. Currently, right now, there's a huge demand for cultivated organic golden seal that's not being met. That means there aren't enough people growing that plant intentionally. Like I've already talked a lot about what's happening in the wild with these plants, but golden seal represents an opportunity for people to begin growing these plants intentionally and making a profit. The price of golden seal has been skyrocketing the past few years because of the demand is getting greater and the supply is getting tighter. Not necessarily by the number of plants, but the size of the plants is decreasing, the wild harvested plants. And so there's a huge opportunity here for people to, not get rich, but definitely help contribute to a diversified farm income by growing these plants in their forest. So that's why I would mention golden seal in that category.
That's wonderful. And so you've worked with plants for over 20 years, it sounds like. Could you please just share with listeners maybe a couple of your favorite herbs, medicinal herbs that you've worked with, and why they are your favorites?
The one that I probably spend the most time cultivating is ginseng, and I was fortunate to land in this neighborhood about 20 years ago. I lived here for about 15 years, and when I got here about 20 years ago, one of my good friends and neighbors, Chip Carroll, was just beginning to cultivate his ginseng, and so I've learned a lot from him about how special this plant is in terms of Asian culture and in terms of American culture in Appalachia and the history surrounding it. It's been, we've been exporting it to China for over 300 years, so it's been providing some economic benefit to Appalachia for that long. I like it because it's like I mentioned, a diversified farm economy. Traditionally ginseng was dug in the fall after it goes to fruit, and so the seeds are viable to plant when you harvest it. So you can be planting its seeds as you dig it. And traditionally, people would do this heading into fall, heading into winter, to either that would be the money they would use to buy their kids Christmas gifts, or that is what I would buy my firewood or my heating oil more likely with, would be the money that I got from digging ginseng. So that was kind of money in the bank for people, and that I'm intrigued by that, by having a plant that can serve you like that if you conserve it. And so yeah, ginseng's one. Plus it's a good medicine. My goal with my ginseng farming is to be able to have enough ginseng that I can have a root every day for myself. And I'm getting close to that now in terms of the age of some of the plants that I've been growing. So yeah, so ginseng's one. That's probably my tops.
So you've been forest farming woodland medicinal plants. So you're actually growing these plants in the forest on your property. So that must be such a wonderful occupation.
I wish it were more of an occupation. It's more of a hobby now, but it is an occupation for some, and we're trying to encourage and teach and help support people who really want to do more of this. But yeah, I'm lucky that way, and it might sound exotic to you or to others, but all my neighbors are doing it. It's not just me. There's a whole community here and beyond. If you look on Facebook, there are all kinds of communities or groups surrounding growing these plants. So it's not so it's not so out of the ordinary in Appalachia to be doing this. It's just kind of what we do. It's because we have the habitat, and it's because we have these intact forests, and it's because we're not clear cutting, and we're not trying to produce any monocultures. We're encouraging biodiversity, and so when you go in the woods to the way I grow ginseng is I go in the woods and I do wild simulated ginseng planting techniques where you rake back the leaves, you scatter some seed, you cover the seed back up with the leaves, and you wait. And hopefully in, 10 down in my neck of the woods, it's over 10 years before you're going to be able to harvest a root will be big enough to harvest and market. So
it's definitely an investment of time.
Yeah, time is the biggest investment for sure. But yeah, like I said, I'm not. There's lots of folks down here doing it. I'm just one of the neighbors, pretty much doing the same thing. But I am grateful.
Oh. And so with your work with UPS, United Plant Savers, and also your own farming and medicinal herb growing, are you hopeful for the future of these plants?
Yeah, I'm optimistic mostly about everything, and I think that's what we need to be. But there are some serious issues that we need to address, and so along with that optimism comes it's not going to happen without work, and we need to. We need to be doing what we're doing. We need to be, incentivizing these plants to be grown intentionally and not rely on wild harvest. And we need to get a handle on how we manage our forests in the United States, all over the world for that matter. We cannot continue to cut timber and deforest and clear cut and use our forests for biofuel or whatever the negative impact is. We need to be smarter about that. We can't continue to do what we're doing, but I'm optimistic that we're all going to come to our senses in time.
With the help of the plants, hopefully.
With the help of the plants, and they're going to be the ultimate healer, whether we're here or not, and that might be what it takes before it all comes back. But with the plants.
And is there anything else you'd like to add that I didn't ask you today that you'd want listeners to know?
No, I think we touched on most of it, but I think some of the important takeaways are to know where your herbs are coming from, and ask your herbal products company, or if you're an herbalist and you're buying raw material for your medicine making, it's good to know where your plants are coming from, and demand a cultivated source, of your native medicinal plants. And that will go a long way in helping us with what we're doing. And it can really help by becoming a member of United Plant Savers. You can do that on our website, www.unitedplantsavers.org, or you can call me at the office. I'll be happy to help you become a member by phone. That's real important to us. We have about 4,000 members right now. If we had twice that number of members, which we're kind of making a goal here in the next 3 to 5 years, then we could spend a lot more time getting plants in the ground, educating people, and a little less time, trying to find money to keep the lights on. So we're lucky that way. Not too many organizations are member supported like we are anymore. Most people have gone away from that, but we've got incredibly dedicated members who show their appreciation for the work we're doing by renewing every year, and we're grateful for that.
That's great. So really grassroots, literally.
It is literally
from the ground up.
For sure.
Oh, that's so great. And I wanted to mention to listeners too, I'll have links in the show notes, but I'll include links to the at-risk and then the to-watch list. And I think it's really important to take a look at these lists and see which plants, we should be very mindful of.
Thank you, Jill. I really appreciate it. We really appreciate it. Like I was saying, we're pretty much a small operation here, and really appreciate you reaching out to us and taking the time to talk to us and help us spread the word of native medicinal plant conservation.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. Bye now.
Bye. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sustainable World Radio with John Stock of United Plant Savers. I just wanted to give you all a heads up that United Plant Savers has had to cancel their events, their workshops, internships, and fellowships due to the COVID-19 virus. You can find out more about United Plant Savers and when their classes and workshops will restart by visiting their website at unitedplantsavers.org. And I hope all of you are staying healthy and well during this time. Sending you much love. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. You can find us online at sustainableworldradio.com and also on iTunes. For more information about permaculture and ecology, visit the Sustainable World Media YouTube channel, where you'll find videos about permaculture, aquaponics, organic gardening, rainwater harvesting, and much, much more. Sustainable World Radio is a listener-supported program. If you like what we do, please consider making a donation to the show. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier, and thank you so much for listening.